The South Carolina Department of Public Safety, Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs presents Financial Requirements for Highway Safety Grants. My name is Talima Richburg, Grants Administration Accountant with the Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs. I will be outlining the financial requirements and procedures for highway safety grant funding. Claims or requests for reimbursement are submitted to the Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs on a Request for Payment form, or RFP. RFPs must be submitted at least once a quarter. You may submit claims as often as once a month, however, we only require quarterly submissions. The quarterly due dates are February 1st, May 1st, August 1st, and November 15th. Failure to submit claims as required may result in the deobligation of the project. Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs traffic safety grants are governed by 2 CFR Part 200. We will cover many of the topics today outlined in the federal regulations. There are separate RFP forms for alcohol impaired driving and police traffic services grants, and is indicated at the top of the cover page or page 1 of the RFP form. Please be sure to use the applicable RFP form for your specific highway safety grant. Displayed currently is page 1 of the alcohol impaired driving RFP form and is indicated at the top in red. We will briefly discuss the different sections outlined on page 1 of the form. Section 1, General Information. This section will contain information specific to your agency and highway safety grant. Areas to make note of in this section are request for payment number, period end date, grant period, and payment type. For request for payments 1 through 3, the payment type will be I for interim payment. For request for final payment, the payment type will be 4 for final payment. The period ending date for RFP 1 will be December 31st, RFP 2, March 31st, RFP 3, June 30th, and RFP 4, September 30th. The grant period will always be October 1st through September 30th. Section 2, Budget Categories. This section will reflect the current period's cost and must be rounded to the nearest whole dollar. Expenditures this period will reflect total expenditures and activity hours being requested for reimbursement during the current period only. Total expenditures to date should reflect a cumulative summary of all expenditures and activity hours occurred from the beginning of the project, including the current claim period. Section 3, Total Costs. This section is a total of all costs and activity hours indicated in Section 2. Section 4, Project Income. This section should be left blank. Any use or unplanned use of project income must be approved by the Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs. Section 5, Unpaid Obligations. This section should show the amount of funds obligated but not paid by the subgrantee. Examples include a purchase order with the vendor. Section 6, Certification. This section is to be signed and dated by the project director. Procurement. Compliance with bidding procedures is required per all applicable federal, state, and local guidelines, and if applicable, the South Carolina Consolidated Procurement Code and regulations. If you select to follow your agency's procurement guidelines, you must be able to provide a copy of the guidelines and backup to support that they were followed. The updated South Carolina Procurement Code is available at the following link. All approved grant-funded purchases must be requested, purchased, received, invoiced, and paid on or before the last day of the grant period, September 30th. All purchases must be submitted to the Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs for review and approval prior to expending funds. Any subgrantee that fails to follow the outlined purchasing procedures will not receive reimbursement. Note on general costs of government. Federal grant funds may not be used for activities considered general cost of government according to long-standing federal law codified in the government-wide rule for federal grants, the Super Circular, unless specifically allowed under the federal statute or regulation. The rationale is that federal funds should not support costs incurred by a state or locality in the ordinary course of conducting its own affairs. This is formally known as supplanting. General costs of government include salaries and other expenses associated with government operation. The Super Circular specifically identifies police or law enforcement and prosecutors who carry out government services normally provided to the general public. The replacement of routine and/or existing state or local expenditures with the use of federal grant funds for costs of activities that constitute general expenses required to carry out the overall responsibilities of a state or local agency is considered to be a replacement of general cost of government and is not allowable. In reference to recent changes, we received new guidance that project agreements may not be expressed in terms of full-time or part-time positions. As a result, the Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs can only reimburse for time spent performing grant activity or activity hours as opposed to full-time or part-time positions. General allowable costs. An applicant's costs must be necessary, reasonable, allocable, and used in accordance with the terms and conditions specified in the grant. Highway safety grant funds are to be used to support state problem identification and planning and implementation of a program to address a wide range of highway safety problems that are related to human factors and the roadways. Programs should promote a reduction in traffic crashes, deaths, and injuries. We will be covering both unallowable and allowable costs in this presentation. Unallowable costs include weapons box, lock storage, uniforms and badges, passive alcohol sensors, mainframe computers, stop sticks, land, promotional items, and body-worn cameras. We do have a separate body-worn camera program, so if this is something that your agency is interested in, please feel free to contact us and we will direct you to our body-worn camera program coordinator. More unallowable costs include the cost of construction, rehabilitation, or remodeling of state, local, or private buildings or structures, international travel, office furniture and fixtures, license plate readers, electronic speed limit signs, monthly cell phone charges, monthly radio service charges, monthly Wi-Fi and MiFi service charges, permanent signage or signage without a safety message, golf carts, speed and checkpoint trailers, block and in-service trainings, leave hours of any kind which include but are not limited to annual, sick, and emergency leave, holiday or comp time, hours spent working a natural disaster, or any crash hours. As mentioned in the guidance concerning costs of government earlier in the presentation, highway safety grants are activity hours based. Therefore, the Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs can only reimburse for time spent performing grant activity. Thus, leave hours of any kind and time spent on natural disasters do not qualify as grant activity and therefore are not reimbursable. This also applies to any unallowable trainings or crash hours. Only training that is grant-related and pre-approved by our office can be reimbursed. Timesheets must be maintained for all project activity hours, reflecting the hours worked and charged to the grant. The total activity hours requested for reimbursement must match the total activity hours listed on your MEDR or monthly enforcement data report. Project activity must be 100% in support of activities agreed upon in the grant award. For example, holidays, leave hours, providing funeral escorts, parade duty, crash hours, or hurricane or natural disaster hours are not considered project activities. If there are questions regarding what is included in the allowable grant activities, please contact the appropriate program coordinator. Only list the hours worked and pre-approved training hours that are applicable to the grant activities as listed in the specific objectives. This will be page 3 of the request for payment form and must be signed and certified by the project director. As mentioned earlier, there are separate request for payment forms for police traffic services and alcohol impaired driving grants. So please be sure to use the applicable form for your specific highway safety grant, as the monthly activity time record will differ for each grant. Displayed currently is the monthly activity time record for police traffic services grants. Here you will list the hours worked and any pre-approved training hours that are applicable to the grant for that month. Displayed currently is the monthly activity time record for alcohol impaired driving and prosecutorial grants only. There are 2 columns, one for alcohol-related activity hours and one for drug-related activity hours. Here you will list the hours worked and any pre-approved training hours that are applicable to the grant activities for that specific month. Grant-funded equipment. A need for the equipment requested must be demonstrated in the problem ID. You must be able to identify that the equipment is needed in order to be able to complete the project to qualify for funding for equipment. This information can be listed in your problem identification. List the enforcement tools such as video equipment, radar or LiDAR needed to implement the project and cost projections. Explain how these tools will be utilized in furthering project objectives. All grant-funded equipment must be used for the original authorized grant purposes for which it was acquired, whether or not the project continues to be supported by federal funds. Agencies receiving funds to purchase equipment must notify the Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs to request disposition instructions when equipment becomes obsolete and the agency desires to sell or dispose of the asset, or equipment is no longer able to be used for its original purpose. You can contact our office for more information on disposal if or when the need arises, and we will guide you through the process. Allowable equipment purchases include police vehicles, which can match the agency's fleet and color, but must be marked as indicated by the Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs. Vehicle light bar package. Exterior lighting must be fixed to the top of the vehicle and primarily blue in color. Vehicle mobile radio unit. In-car mobile video unit, power control center, handheld radar and LiDAR units, siren and siren speakers, and vehicle passenger transportation cages. Please factor in the cost of taxes and shipping so that the costs you incur are covered by the grant. Please note, vehicles and all associated equipment items are subject to a 10% agency buy-in, which we will cover later. Vehicles purchased with grant funds and corresponding equipment may only be awarded if it is determined that the vehicle is needed to implement the project and written justification is required. You may include this written justification in an attachment or within the budget narrative of the grant application. Please note that grant-funded vehicles must only be used for the detection and apprehension of impaired or speeding motorists or motorists committing other moving violations for the useful life of the vehicle. Grant applications are 100% federally funded. No cash match is required for any eligible applicant. However, if you choose to request equipment in your application and it is approved, please note that a 10% buy-in is required for all vehicle and associated equipment items. If you are requesting equipment in your application, please be aware of the buy-in, as it may need to be pre-approved by your agency head. Other allowable purchase items include traffic cones at up to $25 each, push bumpers, and fire extinguishers. Please note, equipment-only grant applications will not be considered for funding. The Buy America Act 23 U.S.C. Section 313 prohibits states from using highway safety grant funds under 23 U.S.C. Chapter 4 to purchase products unless they are produced, manufactured, or assembled in the United States. This prohibition applies to steel, iron, and all manufactured products unless the Secretary of Transportation has determined that it is appropriate to waive the Buy America Act requirement. To qualify for reimbursement, purchases of items with a unit cost greater than $5,000 and/or all motor vehicle purchases must comply with Buy America and meet any bid requirements of the procurement process, if applicable. Items under $5,000 per unit are not required to comply with Buy America. Items $5,000 or greater per unit usually include, but are not limited to, the vehicle, radios, and in-car cameras, and therefore these items must be Buy America Act compliant if their dollar amount exceeds $5,000. Displayed currently is the Buy America certificate to be completed by the vendor for any items with a unit cost of $5,000 or more. The travel support document should reflect miles driven only in respect to project activity hours or approved trainings. Vehicles previously purchased in federal fiscal year 2020 or before with 100% federal funds must only be used in support of grant activity hours with no breaks in mileage. For vehicles purchased with a 10% buy-in, the travel support document should reflect miles driven only in respect to project activity hours or approved trainings. The mileage rate should match what is listed in the grant and your agency policy, and the maximum allowable rate is determined by the federal government, IRS. If your agency rate is less than the IRS rate, you must utilize your agency rate. There must be a corresponding entry for a particular day on the monthly activity time record that matches an entry on the mileage document for that same day in order for the subgrantee to receive reimbursement for mileage. The travel support document must be signed by the project director before mileage reimbursement can take place. Displayed currently is the travel support document or page 5 of the request for payment form. If you are applying for a DUI grant, 2 forms will need to be completed, one for mileage related to alcohol hours and one for mileage related to drug hours. These pages will be included in the alcohol impaired driving RFP form, so please be sure to use the applicable RFP form for your specific highway safety grant. Costs are allowable to pay for the salary of grant-funded personnel while pursuing Office of Highway Safety and Justice Program approved trainings and travel when prior approval is obtained and trainings are specifically listed in the grant budget narrative. Failure to obtain such prior written approval will result in such travel expense claims being denied for reimbursement using grant funds. Attendees will only be reimbursed up to the maximum allowable rate for lodging established by the General Services Administration, excluding taxes and surcharges. Documentation is required for all travel expenses. This may include conference agendas, hotel receipts, parking receipts, and taxi receipts minus tips. The current policy of the South Carolina Comptroller General's Office only allows for reimbursement after the lodging has occurred. Therefore, billing payments made upfront through travel websites such as Expedia, Kayak, or Travelocity are considered advance payment for lodging and will not be reimbursed by the Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs. If the approved attendee is unable to travel or attend a training for any reason, the Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs will not reimburse for those expenditures. The subgrantee is encouraged to request a refund from the original vendor to be reimbursed for any unused travel expenses. Training completion certificates can be provided at the time of the reimbursement request. Listed currently are the State of South Carolina meal per diem rates. Meal per diems cannot exceed state rates. If your agency rate is lower than the state rate, you must utilize your agency rates. For states and local government and Indian tribes, each agency receiving grants to which indirect costs may be charged must have an approved indirect cost rate. Agencies must prepare an indirect cost proposal and submit it to the state indirect cost officer for review and approval. The Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs reserves the right to negotiate indirect cost rate charges to a grant prior to award. If the subgrantee has never had a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, the de minimis indirect cost rate of 10% of the modified total direct cost may be applied. Private nonprofit organizations receiving federal funds are also authorized to recover indirect costs. Grant monitoring. A programmatic and financial monitoring visit will be conducted at least once during the grant period. The Office of Highway Safety and Justice Programs monitoring team will conduct the visit. The project director will receive advance notification of the visit. Additionally, a checklist will be forwarded to the project director that describes in detail the items that will need to be available for the visit. This concludes the financial requirements for highway safety grant funding and applications. For more information, please visit our website or contact one of the Highway Safety Grants accountants. Our contact information as well as the link to our website is displayed currently. We are available for any questions or technical assistance inquiries you may have regarding the financial components of your highway safety grant. Thank you.